Racist boss harassed Puerto Rican employees and broke labor laws. Ended up getting deported. I worked at a fairly well-known restaurant in a small, northern New England city as an assistant manager. The owners were very successful restaurateurs with several successful, non-chain, establishments, and spent maybe a day or two a month in our location. The rest of the time there was a general manager in charge. We'll call her Jan. Jan was about as typo as they come. She was a middle-aged woman, but beautiful and petite, and she always looked put together and primped. Jan had started with the owners a decade earlier in their first restaurant as a server and had worked her way up to general manager over the years. At first, I just thought she had extremely high standards, which I respected. I have high standards as well and take pride in my work. I had been impressed by how the kitchens were spotless, the staff was immaculate, like run a white gloved hand under the back of the oven and it comes back white kind of clean, and the food was always top quality. I had frequently been a customer and was thrilled that I got the job there. I had been in the business for a decade and that restaurant was the place in our area. I was so excited. Unfortunately, I quickly learned why everything is so shining and perfect. Jan was a tyrant. She was the kind of boss who soured the mood of the entire staff like a storm cloud hovering over us that never went away. Nothing was ever good enough and the standards changed from day to day. On a good day, she would shut herself up in the office and then leave early. Good days were very rare and could turn into bad days at the drop of a dime. On bad days you couldn't be perfect enough and she would come up with new rules and regulations just to punish people. If a host called out sick, they were literal children, she would berate them on the phone and make them cry. If a cook made a mistake on a plate, she would humiliate them in front of the staff, accuse them of doing it on purpose and then give us all the silent treatment for hours after. Seriously. If someone's cash out was off, even by a few cents, she would accuse them of theft and force me to cut down their hours. As a fellow manager, I was mostly spared her awful behavior, though I had to hear about her treatment from my staff almost every day. All of this was just run-of-the-mill bad boss stuff until it came time for our yearly staff evaluation meetings. This is where Raul enters the story. Raul was a hard-working dishwasher who had moved to our state from Puerto Rico a few years earlier and spoke English with some difficulty. Whenever I had to go over anything official with him, we would have a co-worker translate between us to be sure we were both communicating clearly. Jan refused this courtesy to Raul. This made his evaluation pretty difficult. Raul managed to communicate to us that due to recent cuts in his hours, he would be forced to get a second job to pay the bills. Something about this absolutely set Jan off. She told him she would fire him if he dared. I could see plainly on the intake paperwork in front of me that Raul had been hired with the understanding that it would be a full-time position, so I pointed that out. Jan was furious, but agreed through gritted teeth that if Raul agreed not to get a second job, she would bump his hours up to at least 35 hours a week. It was stated as clear as day and I documented it in my daily manager logbook. Work went on as usual after that and I didn't think much of this meeting again for a few months. Another time a while later, while filing out information for tax returns, Jan called me into the office. I could tell she had pulled the tiny room apart looking for something. All the information about our Puerto Rican employees is gone, she told me with a mixture of panic and suspicion. I looked at the files in question and they all seemed to be in order, so I was confused and told her I couldn't help. A few minutes later I walked back in the office to find her arguing with Rosa, our most talented chef and a Puerto Rican native. Rosa was perfectly fluent in English. No, Rosa. Jan was speaking to Rosa as though she were hard of hearing or mentally slow. Where is your green card? What are you talking about? Rosa was confused. Are you an illegal or something? Is that why one of you broke in here? To hide the proof? Jan wasn't yelling, but her eyes were cold and flashing with rage. What? Rosa was starting to get angry now. It suddenly clicked for me, so I interrupted. January, you do realize that Puerto Rico is a United States territory, right? Of course, I know that. Jan snapped back. Okay, so you know that Rosa has a social security number like any other American native. Oh, right. Never mind, Rosa, you can go back to work. Jan did not apologize for accusing Rosa of theft. I was so done with this place after that. Jan did all kinds of little things like that and she never apologized. I had already gotten a job offer for a place closer to my house when the final straw came. I was the closing manager one day and got in just before the dinner rush to see Raoul storming out the back door. He didn't speak much English, but his ducking which was very clear. Jan had lied about raising his hours to 35 per week, so Raoul had gotten the second job he talked about. When Jan found out, she fired him, but not before saying something about how all you illegals are the same. She was really fixated on these American citizens being illegal aliens for some reason. By this point, I ducking hated this woman too. She once told me my clothing made me look poor in front of the whole staff. I was wearing what she made me wear. Meanwhile she wore open-toed shoes behind the line which is against the health codes, and once her fake nail fell off into the coleslaw and she wouldn't let anyone toss it out after she retrieved it. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But I have a life to live. Since I knew I would be leaving soon anyway, I told Raoul he should go after our boss for wrongful termination since I had documented proof, with Jan's signature, that he had been promised more hours and that Jan had broken the agreement, not Raoul. The last time I saw Jan was on my way out of Raoul's lawyer's office after giving a deposition about several labor laws she had violated. At least the ones that I knew about. Apparently, there were many others she had broken in front of other employees. She couldn't even look me in the eye. The best part? At my deposition I learned that Jan was actually the one who was illegally in the country. Her green card had recently expired. She was Canadian. She ended up being sent back to Canada as a result of this case and no one has heard from her since. Raoul was granted 6 months of unemployment pay, plus the restaurant had to pay his legal fees. They closed that location not long after. Maybe they should hire their managers more carefully next time. Jan, if you're reading this, I hope you got your shit together. I also hope you learned to wear closed-toe shoes behind the line. You wouldn't want to end up a huge, gigantic duck-up due to your own negligence, now would you? Now to the comments. We had a Lyft driver once go off on the dirty Puerto Ricans and how insulted she was they were applying for emergency funding from the hurricanes like they're Americans or something. Hubby and I gave her a severe dressing down. Did you tell Lyft though? She can be terminated from the platform and it's like such as Uber etc. We really should have. I'd just like to say, we didn't want her back. As a Canadian. I'd also like to add, Jan. Get ducked bud. Another Canadian. I'd also like to mention, Canadians aren't always the nicest people ever. Yet another Canadian. She ended up being sent back to Canada as a result of this case and no one has heard from her since. And they never will again. Sorry for the trouble. And they never will again. Today I learned politeness is harshly enforced in Canada. The secret ingredient in poutine is deviance. I feel like the owners got off lightly. They hired a manipulative and racist GM, they deserve more than paying Raoul. The thing with many of these people is that they're able to manipulate higher-ups into believing they're perfect/fair etc. Once the bosses are gone, they show their real face. Yeah, I don't buy that. Good owners don't just talk to the GM, they talk to the other managers and staff. A friend of mine that runs my favorite restaurant, good for my wallet and belly that it's 1,000 miles away from where I live, told me that a golden rule for him is anyone that disrespects the dishwashers. He spends a good amount of time talking to each employee and there's an open door. Owners that are there only 2 days per month should have spent part of that time talking to Raoul and other employees.